So good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Borsa Istanbul on this beautiful day in Istanbul. Are you sure you want to stay here all day? Just make up your minds. Just to remind you. Okay, the second day will start with a speech by Mr. Simon Poulton. Mr. Poulton will deliver a speech entitled Continuous Delivery and DevOps COE, How an Organization Can Successfully Adopt DevOps Principles. Please welcome Mr. Poulton.
Teşekkürler, günaydın. Nasılsın? Teşekkürler. Okay, I'm now out of Turkish words, so we have to switch to English, unfortunately. Where is everyone from yesterday? Are they at the beach or too much rakı with dinner? Couldn't get up in time maybe? I don't know. All right, so today I want to talk a little bit about continuous delivery and how it fits in with DevOps. A little bit about how we see organizations adopting it. But before I do, what I wanted to do this year was have a little mobile application so that I could get you all to vote on different things that I asked during my presentation. But seeing as I don't have that, my first demonstration is going to be human continuous delivery, okay? Are you ready for human continuous delivery? This is how it works. Everybody puts their hand in the air. Everybody. Like I'm about to call my wife and ask her to put her hand in the air as well. Okay, everybody? Now, what I want you to do is if you work in development, put your hand down, but if you don't work in development, keep your hand up. Okay, so I got a few ops people in the crowd, which is good. And let's try it again, one more time. Everyone's hands in the air. Put your hand down if you work for a large enterprise, 500 or more people. Okay, all right, good. So we're about half dev, half ops, and most of us work in large enterprises. That's good. Otherwise, this presentation would have been probably a little bit boring for many of you. Anyway, just before I get into the content, I work for a company called CA Technologies. So CA is a very large and old vendor, one of the top 10 software companies in the world. I think about number 8 or something at the moment, 14,000 people or so. We've been around for about 40 years. And so what happened around 4 or 5 years ago when I came to CA, they acquired a couple of young startup companies that were very much in the DevOps space. So you've got ITKO, who were the inventors of a technology called service virtualization. You also had Noliosoft, who basically created the release automation space in terms of application-specific release. So the part of CA I work in is very, very much focused on DevOps and continuous delivery. We have around 600 plus customers globally that we've helped through this DevOps and continuous delivery journey. So something that's been a bit of a topic, and Adam yesterday talked about this. I can't see him today, but a couple of the other speakers also talked a little bit about machine intelligence. And because it's Saturday morning and I don't want to overload your brains at the start of the day, I thought we'd start with something a little bit fun. So kind of recently, a couple of years ago, there was a study done in the UK where what they did is basically analysed around 700 jobs to see how likely it would be that if you did that job, would you be replaced by a computer at some time in the next 5 to 10 years. And so what's even maybe a little bit cooler is the BBC website actually made an application where you can type in your job role and see how likely it is that you'll be replaced with a computer in the next kind of 5 or 10 years. And so I was looking at this yesterday, and I was thinking about Hubot. You remember yesterday Elaine talked about Hubot, right? So guess what? You can put in IT job roles. So here you've got IT operations technician, and it says it's 78% likely that you're going to be replaced with a computer in the next 5 to 10 years, right? So I don't know if GitHub are going to maybe provide Hubot as a service, but as operations guys, I was an operations guy for 5 years or so. It's time to start learning some new stuff, right? So that's why we're all here at the conference. The other thing, if I can just find it, the other thing I found amusing is our managers are not going to be replaced by robots, just us. Anyway, okay, let me get back to my presentation. All right, interesting. Worth going to take a look at if you want to see if anyone's going to be replaced. But on the theme of machine intelligence, right, a couple of other innovations that I've seen lately, which, just to kick this thing off a little bit, there's a company called Ross in the United States, and what these guys have done is built an artificial intelligence on top of IBM's Watson. And what this artificial intelligence can do is it replaces the lawyers who would usually do your discovery work in the legal process. So usually, if you want to find out about a certain legal precedent, you go off and hire 7 or 8 lawyers. This intelligence will actually do all of that discovery work for you. So it does a human contextual search. One of the other ones I found a bit innovative and interesting, you have this idea of growth intel, right? And what they do is they look at how people are interacting with your website, with you on the phone, with all your sales data, and they tell you which of your customers are behaving like they're about to buy. So instead of annoying 9 people who really don't care about your product, you can go straight to the people that actually want to buy it. So some of these uses of machine intelligence are getting very innovative. The reason I wanted to start there is because, as we saw in the survey at the start, many of us work for large enterprises, and our bosses and our bosses' bosses and our bosses' bosses' bosses are starting to see that these things are happening. And what the requirement for them to do is to find ways for us to innovate in the market like that. And so that's, a lot of my presentation is going to be how can we adapt our enterprise organisations to be a bit more innovative. So another one, this is kind of the last slightly off-topic things I'm going to talk about, but I was talking to a couple of guys outside yesterday about this. So Gojek is a Malaysian company, very, very innovative. So what they do is basically in Indonesia, rather than getting a taxi, you have these guys on scooters, right, on little scooters. And this guy, the founder, Nadeem, basically whenever he wanted a scooter, he could never find one. So he created an app that's a little bit similar to Uber to work with all the guys on scooters, because they all have mobile phones, of course. But what he then did is went on to innovate with a series of additions. So now you can order basically anything on Gojek. So you can order, you want a nail manicure, you can order someone to get dropped around on the scooter and do your nails, you want some food, they'll deliver that too. So basically all of your daily needs are met by this Gojek application. And so what he said, so that Nadeem, the founder of this, said that in order to be ahead, you've got to always be innovating, always be innovating. And the 3 things he said that you need to do that well, number 1 was, of course, agility, right? Which is what kind of DevOps and continuous delivery is all about. The other things are listen to your customers and understand what your customers are saying. And finally, deliver an impeccable or a perfect user experience, right? And so user experience is going to be one of the other themes of my presentation, right? How do we get a good user experience? Okay, good. So we can move on to things that are a little bit less off topic. I'm not here, obviously, to define DevOps. We all know what it is, but one thing that I thought might be helpful is I'll quickly contrast DevOps and continuous delivery. Right, I think you all know both terms, but I want to talk a little bit about how we communicate that to the businesses we work with, because I spend a lot of my time talking to business people that don't necessarily understand technology, right? And they ask me, what is this DevOps thing all about? So I like to show them a slide with a chicken on it because, I think chickens are a little bit funny. But anyway, from an evolutionary perspective, we know that dinosaurs somehow evolved to chickens, right? But a T-Rex didn't fall asleep one night and wake up the next day as a chicken, right? It's just not how evolutionary systems work. What happened is, little by little, changes in evolution happen so that a T-Rex eventually becomes a chicken. And so what you need to think of in DevOps and continuous delivery is we're making software evolutionary, right? Because what happens when we adopt continuous delivery in DevOps, right? We make many, many, many small changes. And those small changes are less risky. And if something goes wrong with the small change, we can easily back it out and create a different mutation or a different change. So what we're doing is actually following a very natural evolutionary process in our software. And that's what I believe is one of the key mechanisms and the key trends with DevOps and continuous delivery. And if you look at what Elaine from GitHub presented yesterday, he's talking about 100 releases a day, released by anyone. And they're small, well-tested releases, and that's kind of how the whole thing works. So, there's a few other bits and pieces. If you're going to adopt this approach, obviously you need to consider the operational context in your development, and also the design and dev needs to understand what's going to happen on the operational side as well. And obviously from this, we can make small changes very easily and very cheaply. So the other thing is, CD is obviously not equal to DevOps, right? So what is this continuous delivery thing? And I think many of us probably came across the term in about 2010. So this book, I'm not sure if any of you have read it, but it's kind of the seminal text on continuous delivery, Jez Humble and Dave Farley. They're certainly the guys that made this whole concept of continuous delivery famous. But where I first came across the term continuous delivery was actually in 1999, right? So if you go onto the internet and you look at agilemanifesto.org, and I think many of us in the room are probably agilists at heart, you'll find that one of the key principles of Agile is that our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. But the reason for this kind of 10 or 11-year gap between Agile and continuous delivery is that we didn't really have the mechanisms in software, we didn't have the approach to be able to deliver all those changes. Right? And that's really what continuous delivery is all about, is how do we deliver all these agile changes from development into production. Okay, makes sense so far? I guess it's early in the morning, so we're all a bit quiet. Anyone want to object wildly to anything I've said so far? No? Good, it's a good start. All right, so let's switch that a little bit to thinking about how enterprise software is developed within most of the enterprises that we're dealing with, right? So generally today, as I was saying before, if you want to have a modern quality app, it's all about the user experience, right? If you're not designing to user experience, people are not going to have a natural feel with your application, they're not going to like it. And so, at some point on your right-hand side here, you have a customer. On the left-hand side, you have some kind of product or service or something that your company or your software is offering. In between, they might be working on a mobile device, on a laptop, they might be doing something in-store, maybe they're on social media and there's social media sentiment to be involved. But essentially, I think most of you probably know this part of the journey is called the customer journey, right, or customer experience. And I don't know about your enterprises, but I visited some of you, so yeah, I've seen this in your enterprises as well, but basically all across the world, you have these guys called your user experience guys, right? And these are the guys with a funny haircut, a little bit like mine, except they're probably about 10 or 15 years younger because they just came out of university. But these guys basically are responsible for finding a way to map that customer journey, right? And making our applications feel comfortable to that customer, which is great. It seems very simple to them. We'll just make a small change in the application. What happens below the line in the IT department? Catastrophe, right? Looks like a small change, becomes very, very complicated. And that's because our environments are not set up to handle this type of approach. So we end up with this large backlog of software changes, and we've got to try and get through this puzzle, this maze to get it into production. You've got, maybe in development we've adopted some kind of DevOps style things. We might be doing some continuous integration or integrating once a day. But then when we get to user acceptance testing in most banks or telcos, that could be a 3 to 6 month process, right? So all of this great stuff that we're doing to understand what the customer needs is not really getting to affect them. And then, of course, there's another huge wall between testing and operations and, maybe another 3 months in that cycle as well. And it's really a bit of a disaster. And so continuous delivery, as simply as I can put it, is to reduce that cycle time, right? To try and get it from dev to production in the minimum number of days or hours. And of course, these days, I think you guys know, there are plenty of customers doing this in hours. So one of our big lighthouse customers we worked with is ING. I'll talk a bit more about them later when we talk about Centre of Excellence. But they went from taking, over 3 months to get a change into a platform to being able to do it in less than a week and sometimes in 4 hours. So, it is possible even in the strictest of environments to actually make continuous delivery work. If you look again at what components make this up, I think the presenters before me have already talked a lot about integration, about Jenkins, about deploying infrastructure as code, Puppet and Chef. So it's not really where the focus of this is. But beyond that, what I did want to quickly visit is how continuous delivery applies to the quality cycle. Because if what we're doing is accelerating untested code into production, we're really going to cause ourselves a bit of a nightmare. Even if we're using test-driven development, if we're not doing integration tests properly, we're going to cause ourselves a massive disaster. And I've certainly seen this a lot out there. So let's think about when we write a piece of code, what are the things that we need to make sure that code is of sufficient quality? So we've got these user experience guys or the business making some requests. They give us some kind of change request or some kind of development request. It might be an email, it might be a phone call, it might be a Word document. That's usually our first problem, right? Because the way we're taking on requests is not conducive to writing a good set of test cases. And what we really need to do is get a perfect set of test cases against that new development. And there is actually a way to go automatically from business requirement to a perfect set of test cases. And the aim of my talk is not to discuss about that today, but there's certainly methods you should be looking at around optimizing test cases for business logic. The other thing, of course, you need to test against is valid data. As developers and as testers, I think, most of us have seen many instances where we go to test functionality in the software and the test fails, not because there's something wrong with the software, but because there's not the right data in the back end, right? Really difficult problem. So that's kind of the second thing that we want to solve. The third one's dependent systems. So maybe we make a change in one part of the application and we need to test something against the data layer when we make a change in the UI. So tools like service virtualization allow us to actually provide those dependent systems without needing to have, a mainframe under our desk to test against or whatever that requirement might be. Now, the last thing we really need to make this work is we need to understand where the dependent changes are, right? Especially once we move to Agile. One team's working on one component, another team's working on another component, and our development gets a little bit interlocked. So we have to manage that in the best way the best way we can. And certainly there's plenty of tools out there to do that. So the last couple of things on continuous delivery before I move on to talk a bit more about adoption and Centre of Excellence. There's a couple more things you want to complete the picture, right? So you need to have a good understanding of what developers are working on what. And I don't know, I guess a lot of you have agile development in your organisations. Many of you know about scaled agile framework. Right, sound familiar? So you need something to apply methodology to your agile change, otherwise managing it gets out of control and you don't know where all those changes are, right? And it becomes, again, a little bit of a disaster. Finally, we want to instrument those apps and make sure that we're getting that real feedback loop, right? That's one of the key things in continuous delivery is we also want to understand very quickly, if we make a change, what the impact of that change is on the software. Right, so that's what I'd consider high-level continuous delivery. Again, if anyone wants to disagree wildly, feel free to raise your hand or yell out. But it's a bit early in the morning for that. Okay, so that's theoretical continuous delivery, right? The next thing I wanted to talk about is, because we work I work with enterprise customers. As I said, CA is a 40-year-old company. Our history before all these acquisitions was on the mainframe side. So almost every customer I work with has some kind of legacy technology, right? And that's the zombie technology, because zombies never die, right? Like legacy technology. And so, to give you a couple of examples, right? When we were working with Tesco, they came to tell us about what they'd been trying to achieve. I don't know if you know Tesco, but they're a very, very old retail company, very large retail company based in the UK, but across Europe and into India. And when they first came to talk to us, they said, look, Simon, what you've got to understand is at the till, sometimes we have 100-year-old technology. I'm like, 100-year-old technology? You try and apply continuous integration to something that's 100 years old. Forget about it, right? So this is a massive challenge for most of us, dealing in the enterprise. And this is one of the key things that I want to talk a little bit about later as we talk about adoption. Don't forget that you've got to include legacy technology. It's all very nice to grab onto these new DevOps capabilities, but you need to think about how that affects the legacy side of things, right? So, Gartner, for instance, have this idea of pace-layered approach where you have systems of innovation at the front and kind of systems of record at the back, systems of differentiation in the middle, and you make, really lots of big changes and fast changes at the front, but never really change the back end. And to me, you're never really going to get the most out of a system unless you make some transition plan. So if I think about a customer example again, I mentioned ING before. So if you look at what these guys have done, they picked up on continuous delivery a couple of years ago, and they've really been ramping hard. So they went from starting with one application, which was one of their mobile applications, to now having 300 to 400 applications on their continuous delivery platform, right? 300 to 400 applications releasing through continuous delivery, which is pretty amazing. But one of the things that struck me, they came and presented at a continuous delivery user group that we ran earlier this year. And these guys are actually trying to do away with batch banking. Their goal is to get to real-time banking through architectural change. And so I guess my point is, from a legacy technology perspective, that architectural change will give you a platform to create something to replace your legacy systems with, right? So I guess starting a continuous delivery project with a legacy system might not be the best idea in the world. Is Rem or Oscar from Akbank here? No. Okay, one of our local customers here, we did start on the legacy platform with them, which actually, when it's considered well and done well, it's fine. But, probably one of the good pieces of advice is start with something a little bit easier. Otherwise, it's always going to be difficult, fraught with danger. My next friend after legacy technology is legacy process. Right? Because where you have legacy technology, you have legacy process. And, this thing's a massive inhibitor to change, huge inhibitor to change. It's people get very set in their ways. So I was working with an actuarial company recently in South Africa, and these guys, we were talking about continuous delivery, we're trying to make plans about, okay, how's this going to work, how's that going to work, conceptual architecture. And then one of the guys, Gerald, goes to me, let me show you how we do a change request, proceeds to log into 3 different systems and manually fill out 3 different forms and submit them manually, which then generated an email so someone else could manually log in to approve them, right? And I don't think that's uncommon, but why would we have such a legacy process? Why wouldn't we assign computers to do these things? And one of the big challenges in organisations is not necessarily that you can't automate the process. It's that people aren't ready to automate the process, right? And so that, the concept of inertia, right? Something with a big mass, it's like a big boulder, it's very hard to move it. So that is what organisational legacy process is about, right? You've got to find an effective lever to try and move that legacy process. And really, that's what the next part of my presentation is going to be about, is how do we combat this, how do we come at this? Because, I expect most of you are at least a little bit passionate about DevOps, right? Like I am, yeah? That's why we're here, right? That's why we're here on a Saturday. You know, you must be the passionate ones because you're not at the beach with the other guys. Okay, I digress. Talking about the beach again, obviously it's on my mind with the Istanbul weather. So how do we affect change in an organisation, knowing all of these things that we're going to come across? What's the magic recipe? This is what I like to call the golden triangle. So the first thing we need is proper business sponsorship. So we need the big fat guy smoking the cigars with all the money to buy into this, which is difficult, right? It's difficult, but I'll come at how we do this. That's number one. Second thing, hearts and minds, right? Because, you know, there's plenty of people here, but if I total the number of people per organisation, apart from, you know, Borsa Istanbul, it's probably not a large number of people per organisation. So when you guys go back after today, you know, impassionated about DevOps going, we're going to change stuff, and you've got 400 other developers or 399 other developers that are going, I don't know what this DevOps stuff's about, you're going to hit a big roadblock. And so one of the other things that you really want to do is capture the hearts and minds of the people that you work with. And there are some tricks to how we do this. It's not like dirty tricks like you know, selling used cars or anything like that, but there's some good ways to do this, and I'll give you some methodology. The last thing, the third part of this golden triangle, is really around momentum. Right, so we want the snowball effect. I really like Calvin and Hobbes, that's why I put this little one in there, but you know, he makes the snowball and it goes and knocks someone else over. So we want to make a continuous delivery or a DevOps snowball to roll down our enterprise hill so that our organisation gets this momentum around it. And if you get that golden triangle, it becomes a feedback loop. You know, and I've seen this in organisations like ING where the momentum just keeps growing and growing and growing. And some of the rest of my content is about how to do that in your organisation. So we have a bit of a methodology to this. Like I said, we have a lot of customers, but obviously to get to successes, we had quite a few failures. So in the last 5 years, you know, we've learnt from some of our mistakes, and you know, what I wanted to give you today is how have we found success works in a large enterprise or a medium-sized enterprise. So continuous delivery, DevOps and change, it's a bit of an iceberg, right? It's a very big thing. It's impossible to digest. You can't eat it with a spoon, no matter how much, you know, raspberry sauce you put on it. So how do we carve up that iceberg so that the enterprise can digest it? The first thing, and you know, when Adam presented the first session yesterday, I was really glad he talked about this stuff, which is we might be developers, we might be operations guys, but until we all become business guys in our heads, we're going to struggle to solve the toughest problems. So the first thing we need to think about when we're thinking about DevOps, continuous delivery, and pushing that through the organisation is what strategic initiatives are going through the mind of the organisation, right? That big fat guy lighting up the cigar with his, you know, 10 lira note. What keeps him up at night? And if the answer to that, if one of the answers to that is not innovation, and you're here and want to work in DevOps, I would suggest getting on the phone to some other organisations, right? Because if you're not in a company that wants to innovate, there's going to be very little tolerance for something disruptive, like DevOps and continuous delivery. Or maybe not pick up the phone and talk to another organisation. Maybe get some time with some people that can put this on the agenda, because maybe the business won't be around that long if it's not trying to innovate. Right, so strategic business goals, number one. Number two, we do a thing, we don't charge our customers for it at the moment, but it's kind of a half-day workshop type thing. So what we do is we get everyone in the room from all the different areas in the business. So, you know, maybe the head of testing, the CIO, the head of operations, you know, we get basically people from all the stakeholders, even maybe marketing, you know, some business people, hopefully, because, you know, we need them on board. We get them together and we start uncovering how does the technology and organisational process fit against those strategic business goals. So here's a picture of one we did with one of the largest mobile providers, one of the largest telecommunications providers in the US. So you can see here we've got around 20 people in the picture, again, from various different places. You can't really read it, it's a little bit small, but what you see there is basically whiteboard after whiteboard of us going, okay, Mr. Head of Testing, get up there and write on that whiteboard, what are the things that you're really struggling with? And he'll write things like, these developers keep giving me crap code. And then the developer will get up there and the development manager will write, these testers don't know how to test. There's a bit of infighting and stuff. It's a little bit painful, a little bit risky. Just don't let anyone in with knives or guns and, the session tends to go okay. But what happens is we uncover a lot of the process within the organisation, a lot of the friction, which is one of the most important points to finding the way forward. A couple of other examples. Again, this is from an insurance company in South Africa that we did a day with recently. And what we're uncovering here is software development process, where are the manual processes, all this kind of thing. This discovery is critical to actually finding the right way. So these sessions, you could focus on a single application. So, if you have one application that is the lifeblood of the organisation, you could focus on that. But you can also, if you've got a bit longer time, I've sometimes done these over 2 to 3 days, you can look at the whole application landscape in the organisation. But the end result is, what you want to come up with is a roadmap. And I'm not talking some 200-page, consultant document that no one ever reads and gets basically thrown in the recycling bin and never looked at. I'll actually give you an example. So this is actually a real roadmap advice. It's very, very high-level summary. Again, you probably can't read it, but what we were recommending to this, again, this is another organisation in South Africa, and what we were recommending to these guys was a few different things. This is not in prioritised order, by the way. We just pick what are the biggest 4 or 5 gaping holes, right? What are the obvious things that we all discussed in this discovery process that are causing problems? And so for them, there was a big thing around their agile methodology and how that was deployed. But the second thing was too much manual process, right? Not enough automation in the release process. And also the other thing, one of the other things of the 5 big things was a thing called Poppy, which is kind of like your BDDK, but for all organisations. So it's about compliance. So, we picked a few things. Compliance, for instance, you could use a compliance project to actually get some continuous delivery style test data going. Because while you're finding data that's non-compliant, you can actually be finding clever ways to provide data to the test environment. So what you're looking for is to find these things that not only will help that manual process and help the organisation forward, but also things that lend themselves well to kind of continuous delivery type prospects. So we've discovered these high-level roadmaps. Are we ready to go and do a project? Not quite. One more thing left to do first. And this is the key thing for me in convincing the big fat guy with the cigar that he should sponsor this, right? And that's business value of those items. So if we've got 5 items, we want to go and do a quick return on investment for those 5 items and see which one matters most to the business. Right? Because what you'll find is either 1 or 2 of these will align with the strategic objectives of the organisation, but will also provide a huge payback for the organisation as well. And then you can take that back to the business and start creating some value streams. Right? So I asked before about scaled agile framework. So if you're familiar with SAFe methodology, you should know about value streams. So now we're creating, in essence, mini projects that we can build out either in parallel or in series within the organisation, right? And start getting the adoption going. Why do we do it this way? Why do we do it in an agile way or in a, why do we DevOps the DevOps? Because you want to start small. We were talking about the snowball effect before. This is me, in essence, finding a little pebble and rolling that thing down the hill, which will eventually become the snowball. Right, so we're not starting some huge project that's going to take a 60 million lira approval from, the guy who's one underneath God who's got to sign it off. That's not what we're doing. We're finding one business sponsor with enough say to go, okay, that 500k lira project, go for it, start executing, start small and get something done. Again, Then what do? We execute the project and we're done and we move on to the next one? No. You've all got to become marketeers, unfortunately, if you want to work in enterprise and you want to do DevOps. It's not like working at GitHub or at Spotify where, you can just go and innovate. You've got to sell, because these guys are set in their ways and they're not going to change that for you unless you're convincing. So sell, back to the organisation. So to give you an example, these pictures here, a good trick for this, especially when you're trying to sell back to the rest of the development organisation, is to do a showcase. So this is from one of the largest banks in the UK, so a large high street bank. What we did with them is the first project we put a continuous delivery toolchain on, we worked on one of their mobile applications. And what we did with the results of that, right, so we finished this first little project, we did like a showcase day. So what it was like an event kind of like this, except for the couple of thousand developers that this bank has. And we took them through all the stages in the SDLC that this new pipeline went through. So we could kind of socialise with them. I'm a developer, I've got my tools, I use Eclipse and I check my code in and I don't care about the other stuff. Why would I want to learn about this? What's the benefit for me? Oh, right, so I can get my code into UAT in a couple of days instead of 6 weeks, right? So what we're trying to do is show the different parts of the organisation the benefit and get them really, really sold on that, so that then when we come to deploy that, we're not going to face challenges, right? And I've tried doing with this and doing without this type of thing, and I tell you, without it, it can be a bit of a struggle. All right. Any questions so far, by the way? I'll take questions in the middle if anyone's got them. No? Okay. So that kind of discusses... Oh, sorry, was that a hand up? No, you were just fiddling your watch. Yeah, okay, no worries. Adoption to COE. So we talked a little bit about how we're going to engineer continuous delivery, how we're going to get the organisation to adopt it. But once we get that kind of, nascent or fractional or tiny support, how are we going to build that into something strong enough to keep changing and keep pace with the organisation? The first thing is you've got to have a call to arms, right? Because, this is technical stuff. We find it very interesting, but we're geeks, right? So you've got to make it interesting to everyone else. So have what I like to call a manifesto, right? What a manifesto is it basically says, this is what we're about, Team DevOps, this is what we do. I won't read you this whole example, but it's a little bit corporate. I like them to be a bit more, free-feeling than this. But anyway, what we're basically saying in this one is the continuous delivery practice in this organisation is about giving differentiated, higher value software to customers, but also to satisfy the business as well. Right, so we're satisfying customers and business, so we know that everything we do has to align to that. But it also talks about empowering employees. So, if you want to get that kind of that Spotify or that Netflix or that, new company feeling in your enterprise, you've got to set a flag in the ground, right? And you've got to tell people where you want to go. Slightly more boring one. This is from a different large bank in the UK. They decided to align to 4 pillars, and typically with a large old bank, it's like a 6-page document for their, how they're going to run their DevOps thing, which no one ever reads. That's why I like them short and snazzy, because they don't get lost. But anyway, they broke it down to 4 different things that they wanted to achieve with this COE. So they wanted to enable agility. They wanted to foster alignment between the business and IT, obviously improving the quality of service for people. But the other thing that they put in there, and I think this is quite clever, is they wanted to satisfy the big paycheck, right? That the big fat guy with the cigar signed off. They said, we're going to get you your money back, right? Which is not often in the project manifesto or most of the waterfall projects I've been involved in. So it's a clever way to be able to go and ask for the next check, right? When you want to go double down on the first DevOps project. Okay, so which model to adopt, right? So yesterday, a couple of the different presenters had slides up for, you can have a federated model, you can have a decentralized model. If you go to this site, Devops Topologies, so It's not massively in depth, but it's a discussion site for different formations of teams. The important thing is not the actual formation, it's that you map it to how your enterprise works, right? So if you look at Spotify, right, I don't know if you guys have looked at this, but the way they do their development, the way they break their teams down is into squads, right? They call them squads. And these squads are pretty much autonomous, right? And the squads map pretty much to APIs, and a squad works on an API or an application function, and that's kind of their baby. But another squad can come and work on it with the permission of that squad and with them doing a code review because they want to enable a more open source culture. So that works really, really well in Spotify, where it's not a top-down approach. Right? They have a couple of videos on YouTube which I strongly recommend you go and have a look at, because they're really insightful as to how a development culture can be within an organisation. But it's probably not going to work in a large bank, if I'm honest, right? No one's going to trust a squad of developers to go and execute whatever they want, at least not quite yet. I think some of the banks I've seen are getting there, but yeah, it's definitely worth looking at. But the important thing is choose something that works with the organisation well. And your mileage may vary. Right, so regardless of how you choose to form that COE, there's some things that we found in our customers are kind of critical to have as part of that COE. So the roles on the left are, I think you can't have a COE without them. So once you get past that first project and you're going, okay, now we're going to start threading multiple projects into continuous delivery, obviously without an executive sponsor, there's no point forming a COE, right? So at this point, you probably want to go to the boss of the guy that signed off the original check for the first project with that guy and say, hey, look what we did all this cool stuff. We want to form a COE to make this better all over the organisation. So you need that highline executive sponsor. The other thing you need is a business champion. This can be a difficult one, because what you're looking for is someone that's kind of a project manager but a bit of an internal sales guy as well, because they need to understand how to create internal business cases for continuous delivery so that they can get more money, but they also need to understand how to communicate success or failure of the project within the business. Again, critical for really getting this thing rolling. Two other components, and these can be separate people or the same people. You obviously need a technical champion. So this is, I don't know, are there many enterprise architects here? I don't know, nod your head, dance. Yeah, so enterprise architects usually will fill this role, because you need someone who understands the technology and the software lifecycle, but is able to go and convince people that there's technological merit in changing how they do things. Last thing you need, and again, this is more of maybe a junior project manager type thing, depending on the organisation, you need an adoption lead, right? And so that adoption lead is someone that's going to go and drive with all the different development teams and all the different applications, and all the different BUs, how are we going to adopt this continuous delivery thing? On the right-hand side, these roles are, you need them per technology. Right, so you might have a subject matter, an SME, subject matter expert for a particular technology or capability. So you might have one for continuous integration. You might have one for your automation pipeline. You might have one for your test data. But you need, and it doesn't have to be different people, but the larger the organisation, the better it is to have more people. And they don't necessarily have to be directly in this team. They can be virtually in this team as well if we're kind of forming, clusters or guilds based around this. What are we going to do with the ops guys? We're going to make them tech administrators. So these people have got something great to do. It leverages the skill set of operational people. It gives them something to do, basically maintain the day-to-day operations and capability of that particular technology, right? So they do things like upgrading the continuous delivery system, this kind of thing, kind of more operational tasks, but just using them in a slightly smarter way. A couple of other roles there, if you want to have a tester from the testing team or the quality team become part of this virtual team to test the continuous delivery pipeline, it can be a good thing to have. Okay. Right, so you want to basically run this as a product, right? Or if you're not doing agile development, you want to run it as a project, but I think it works much better as a product. So your continuous delivery practice within the organisation should be versioned, right? And you should have backlog meetings and you should be grooming the backlog, right? What's next on our continuous delivery pipeline? But even broken down per product, right? So say we're doing service virtualization, we go, okay, version 1, we could imitate a mainframe. Version 2, we want to imitate some other core banking system, right? Or whatever that is. But you need to version and backlog those capabilities so you can keep the roadmap flowing and keep it maturing. What that then looks like is, under that COE, you're then branching out into other teams, whether they're virtual or actually part of that same structure, and they're going to work in parallel over that. Right, so it looks like I'm starting to run out of time, am I? Right, I talk too much, sorry. All right, well, this will be my last slide. Okay, the second last slide. Okay, so I just wanted to show you very quickly. That's what it looks like in practice, right? This is for one thing, this is for service virtualization project, but goes all the way from, creating the COE to basically full maturity in 6 months. In the presentation, I've also got some pitfalls, but I don't really have time to go through them, but needless to say, yesterday I spoke very, very quickly in 5 minutes about measurement, and I can't stress enough how important it is to get those measurements before, right? Otherwise, you'll forget about it and you'll never be able to prove how successful that was, and the whole DevOps thing will just grind to a halt, and we don't want that. All right, that's it. Any questions at all? Any comments? Yep. Don't ask any hard ones, it's too early on a Saturday.
Hello, Simon. My name is Murat. You actually the only one who touched the realities, such as the guy with the cigar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is really important in big companies. Mm-hmm. I'll ask something related about this. For example, as we developers, we find something, we try something. If it doesn't work, 10 years later, we rename it, rebrand it, and reserve it. Such as when you say, let's do TCP, unicast, multicast, nobody likes it. And when you say event-driven architecture, everybody likes it, Mm-hmm. And 10 years ago, there was do you know Rational Unified Process, IBM?
Right, yeah, no, I've heard of it, but
yeah.
I don't know that much about it.
Actually, here is the idea. Business value is delivered incrementally in time-boxed cross-discipline iterations. Mm-hmm. How similar to Agile. And what was the change that we cannot do something in 10 years ago? We know something, it's useful, but we cannot serve it to hold the community, hold the person. But 10 years later, we rename it, we say Agile, and that spark happens. What was the difference?
I think there's a few. One critical change is in what customers expect, right? So customers, even of large banks now and conservative organisations, expect super user experience, 5-star rated app, right? So what that's mean is we need to be feature oriented, right? So we need to transition our development towards features. So that's been a big change, because before it didn't matter, you could just say, I'm not going to provide that feature to a user, it's too difficult to develop, and you could get away with it. In the digital age, that puts you out of business. So the mandate for innovation is much higher, that's number one. Number two, we didn't have the tools or the process to do this. So that first diagram I put up of the walls between, UAT and production, the ideas that drove this came in 1999. But the technology that enabled it, that took Amazon Web Services, it took Netflix, it took Facebook, it took Google. It took companies that were built by software engineers, right? So Google's a perfect example, right? Software engineers own the company. So they drove the methodology and they drove the theory into the company. And that created a situation where now, you know, banks and insurers, they're going to have to compete with that. You know, I was at an insurer the other day and they said, I'm really worried about the data that Facebook and Google have because they have more data to indicate how they should insure someone than we do as an insurance company. So that market shift, I think, very much drove the need for, you know, our organisations, enterprises where we work, to do the same thing. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
As best as I can answer it. That's my theory.
Yes, because it's important that after this moment, maybe, if there is something useful, maybe we can brand it in the first place well and don't have to wait for another 5 years or 10 years.
Let's hope so. It's our hope, right? Yeah, very good. Thank you. Anything else? No? All right. Thank you very much, guys. Very good for an early Saturday morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Poulton. Now, our next speaker is Mr. Serhat Dirik. Mr. Dirik will deliver a speech entitled Boost Your DevOps Adaptation with OpenShift Pass. Mr. Dirik is on the stage.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I just need a few minutes to get ready, guys. Okay. Yeah, okay. Thank you. So, hello everybody. My name is Serhat Dirik. I work for Red Hat, obviously. And thank you very much being here today on a sunny and beautiful Istanbul day. I would like to keep my speech short and jump on the demo part if I can succeed it. As you know, there are different level of aspects and successful DevOps adaptations that you need to touch. People side, technology side, process side, to have a successful DevOps adaptation in your organization. I'm not going to give you a description of what DevOps is and best practice of DevOps. I just would like to highlight some of these aspects. On the people side, DevOps is definitely about a cultural paradigm shift. It requires a different mindset. And you also need to restructure your organization. On the processes side, the DevOps itself is actually an improvement on top of agile methodologies. If you don't have agile methodologies in place, you don't bother to adopt DevOps at all. On the technology side, it definitely requires automation tools in place. And this is the point that I'm going to talk about today. When we say automation, we can speak about 3 levels of automation. At the bottom side, you see infrastructure automation. Infrastructure automation, when we say infrastructure automation, we mean your resources automation, provisioning of resources automation. And typically, this type of automation can be gained by deploying IaaS solutions. And I'm not going to talk about this part today. I just wanted to highlight this is not one thing that you should expect from your PaaS solution. On the other hand, there are different levels of automation, such as application lifecycle automation and application runtime platform automation. These are the topics that you need to expect from your PaaS solution. When we say application lifecycle automation, typical use cases of these having a continuous integration delivery pipeline, automated testing tools, automated quality test, coverage tools, software coverage tools. We meant all of these. These type of tools can be quickly enabled by a PA solution inside your organization. And PA solutions also provides application runtime platform automation capabilities, like middleware platforms that you require to deploy your applications on top of it, or frameworks. And it also, typical PA solutions also provides operational capabilities like elastic auto-scaling, automated setup, automated provisioning, automated deployment, and resource optimization. I believe it's the best way of describing what PS is, giving a comparison in between different cloud service models. You know, SAS is your ultimate goal. You all, developers all, and companies all like to create these type of services. Most typical examples of these type of cloud services are Google applications, for example, or Salesforce. We all like to have this kind of offerings in our enterprises. On the left-hand side, you see IaaS. IaaS, infrastructure as a service. What we expect from IaaS is actually provisioning of your resources, but nothing else. With IaaS models, most typical examples of IaaS are, maybe you heard OpenStack platform is the most famous example of IaaS platforms nowadays. You can also think about some Amazon services like EC2 services. On IaaS platforms, you can have your resources quite easily, but on top of that, you need to take care of everything else that you need to create your applications, such as such as operating system. You need to install an operating system on top of VM that you provisioned in that IaaS system. Then you need to install your application needs, application libraries like middleware or frameworks, such as PHP, Ruby. And on top of that, you can start implementing your solutions. In PS model, things are quite different. With the PS model, you can just provision an application server with a single click, and you can order it with a single click and start your implementing your code on top of that. So in IaaS model, what you are ordering is a resource, a machine. In PS, this is quite different. What you are ordering is an application server and database, or anything else that you might need to have for your development life cycle. So what are the benefits of using PS? For the developer side, it's really a great simplification of processes to have new environment in place. In a typical software development lifecycle process, you need some environments, and you go and order these environments from operational teams, and this is the point where operation teams and software development teams having conflicts. On the traditional environments, ordering this, your resources from operation teams may take